Hi everyone. So today let us try to understand the three most important terms when we talk about machine learning. The first and foremost term is regression. And the second term that we are going to discuss today is classification. And the third term that we are going to discuss is clustering. Now let me tell you, the first two terms or the first two approaches belongs to supervised learning. And this third approach belongs to unsupervised learning. And now, so first let us try to understand what is regression actually. So to understand about the regression, the first we need to understand why regression is called as supervised learning. Because the regression works in this way. For example, let us assume that we have two input variables a and b and an output variable. So the regression works in this way.
2, 3, and 5, 5, 9, 6.5, 7, 10, 12, and so on.
So here, why it is called as supervised learning? That's our question, right? It is called supervised learning because the regression only works with input data and the corresponding output data. So the model based on regression works like this. It tries to plot these points on some graph and tries to apply some different equations to the data, and then finally choosing a perfect equation. That is, for example, let us say if you assume that y is equal to f of x is a function, the regression model tries to fit a function in such a way, the regression model tries to fit a function in such a way that predicted value, let us assume the predicted value is
4.9, somewhere around 5.8, and somewhere around 11.7.
so let us assume that these are the predicted values for the actual values. The output variable is the actual value and the predicted value p is an predicted value for the actual value. So here we try to find a function in such a way that these differences are minimum. Mean the actual value minus the predicted value, or the difference between the actual value and the predicted value should be minimum. Such a way that the regression model tries to predict some function. So this is the approach of regression. So why it is called supervised learning? We can simply say that this is supervised learning because it is depending on the output variable or the output label. That is why it is called supervised learning. The first doubt is clear. Then why it is called as regression? Because the main difference between the regression and the classification problem is that the regression model contains continuous value. When you observe this output variable, the output variable that we are predicting is a continuous value. So that's the reason we call this kind of problems as regression problems. So the worst example for the regression problem in real world is that house price prediction. House price prediction by using the data such as size of the house, area it belongs, and many other features. By considering all these features, we try to predict the price of the house. So in real world, we know that the price varies because it will be maybe
$500 or $450, $550, and so on.
the price is a continuous variable. Here we cannot state that the price is either $500 or $600. We cannot state like that because we cannot confine the price like that because the price is a continuous variable based on
The size, area, the location where the house is residing, and the corresponding facilities available around the house.
depending on those things, the price value may vary. So when we try to solve these kind of problems in which the output variable is continuous variable, then that is called a regression approach. Try to understand the second approach, which is a classification approach. To simply explain the classification approach, the main difference is that the output variable is a classification variable. In the sense, on the input data, we try to divide the things into classes, whether this data belongs to class A, this data belongs to class B, or so on. Let's assume that there are two variables as in the previous case, and
The values maybe 2, 3, and 7, 9, and 7, 5, and so on.
the input data can be either continuous or anything. To make it simple, I took this as continuous variables, but they can be even characterized variables. Okay, keeping that aside. Now, what is the main difference here is that here the output variable may be
Class A, this maybe belongs to class A, this might belongs to class B. And there are only two classes, A and B. I mean, two different classes, A and B. So again, this belongs to class A, and so on.
so here when you try to observe these data, this data is completely uh, classification data. Why I call this as a classification data? Because the output variable here says that either the data belongs to class A or the class B. So this is called classification because what we are doing here, we are trying to classify the data based on AB values. We are trying to classify the data into two types, which is either class A or class B. So this kind of problem is called classification problem. So why it is called as supervised approach? Because this model is completely depending on output variable. Pretty good example for this classification approach is in real world is based on the symptoms of the patient. We are trying to try to predict whether he is having cancer or not. So this is called classification problem, right? Whether there will be only two classifications, either he is having cancer or he is not having cancer. Assume that I gave you some bunch of data regarding the cancer patients. I gave you some bunch of data. This data contains only input variables. For example, only AB values. I am not classifying. I am not giving the data about the what is the classification thing. I have only given you the bunch of A and B values, and I asked you to predict the output variable. This stupidity, right? Because without knowing whether, if you have some previous data, for example, if some set of symptoms are known to be a canceric symptoms, we would try to find those symptoms in the data and classify them as cancer patients. Without knowing previously whether these kind of symptoms belongs to cancer patient or not, we cannot do any prediction in this. So this model is depending upon the output variable. I think you are getting my point, right? This classification model is depending upon the output variable present in the previous data. So that's the reason this is called a supervised model, because it is depending upon the output variable. This is called an unsupervised approach. Why you are calling this as an unsupervised approach? Because here we try to find patterns or grouping in the data. Here we try to find patterns or grouping in the data.
So, as I said in the morning class, let us assume that there are some data points here, and let me pick another color, and there is some data point somewhere around like here, and let us try to pick one more color. So let me try to pick one more color. Okay.
Let us try to understand this clustering problem in the graphical manner, because understanding the clustering problem in the form of data is tough. So let me give you some this graphical example. So let us assume that there are two variables A and B with some data 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 9 and so on. We don't have any output variable in the clustering approach. Why we are not having any output variables? Because this is an unsupervised approach. Why we call this an unsupervised approach? As we do not have any output variable. To simply say that the class here in the clustering, we try, since we don't have any output variable. So this is the case where when you don't have any output variable, but your main idea is to find the groups. So based on the given data, the idea is to find the groups or clusters. Here when you try to observe this data has formed three clusters. The best example for this clustering approach can be seen in the shopping platform. Okay, where we will find that? Okay, that's the question, right? I will explain you. If you are working in the Amazon, when you are given a 1 million customer details, buying details for 1 year. So for 1 year amount period of time, you are given some 1 million customer details and the customer shopping details. So the main problem for that data is that you need to find some clusters or some group of people who are spending much more amount in a year. For example, if you pick last 20 or 21 year, you need to find the people who are buying much more products or spending much more amount in our platform. So we will pick those people and we will give some offers to them such that the buying rate could increase.